Welcome back to the studio. In our last video in this series, we were able to get the ark built, and now we have a place to house all of our wonderful family of animals. So today we're going to proceed and we're going to get the giraffes rounded up, and they're going to be the next ones to board. So I'm going to go ahead and safely stow our ark away out of my danger zone, and we're going to get working on the giraffes. I have my light box out. Even though my background fabric's really light, I think it makes it just a little bit easier for you to see the pattern. This is our kit that has everything we need inside. So I'll start by pulling out our color cover sheet, which is really great for helping us see where any of the pieces go, if in the case that two pieces are the same size but they're different colors. So I can just set that aside. And one of the first things I like to do is usually the pattern is folded when we put it into the kit because the pattern's bigger than the bag. So what I always like to do is just give the paper a dry iron just to get out the creases, because I don't want those folds to translate into a misplacement of one of the pieces of our applique. It's funny because I'm not really a perfectionist in a lot of areas, but this is one of the areas that I do every time. So now I can go ahead and slide the pattern underneath my background. It's also a really great time just to double check that we have the right size background blocks. This is our instructions that go over all of the steps of the applique. Basically, we're dealing with a peel, place, and press. And by that, I mean that we're going to peel the paper off of the backing. All of these pieces are pre-fused with Steam 2 in a manufactured setting. So it has the adhesive on the back of the fabric, and then there's a paper backing. So we're going to peel that paper off. Then we're going to place it in position where it needs to be on our background. If we get it in the wrong place, we can reposition. So that's the place. And then the last step is to press, but we do have to press with steam. So I'm going to put my instructions there, and because I have so many of these and I have it memorized, I use this to collect the backing of all of my little sticky pieces, because these do have residue left on them after we peel the paper off. I've found that if you let them fall on the floor and the sticky part hits the floor, they can be hard to sweep up. If you notice, this piece was folded when it was in the bag, so I just gave it a quick press. Again, I don't want that fold to translate onto the applique piece. I think that was the only piece that was too long for the bag, and that was the neck. Speaking of that, did you know that a giraffe's neck is over 6 feet high? Giraffes are they are the largest mammal on the earth. The giraffe's neck is so long that it can't bend over and touch the ground. They have to kneel down to be able to touch the ground. I think they're fascinating. So I'm going to go ahead and pull the rest of my pieces out and place them in a way that I can identify them easily. Usually I place all of the flower components together, all of the face components together, and it's easier to identify them while you're working. So I'm going to go ahead and pull you in a little bit closer, and then we can get started. Okay, I have everything pretty much in place. My block is right over top of my pattern, and up here you can see that a portion of the dragonfly extends off of the block. I can decide either to just leave this part off until we get the blocks sewn together, or leave the whole thing off and do it at the last. I'll decide that in just a few minutes. Anytime you see a dotted line, that indicates that that part of the applique is underneath something else. So that is just something that you could keep in mind. And you could either start at the top and work down, or at the bottom and work up. I like to just bend one of the edges and get a little bit of the paper backing going, and then I can just peel that paper off and stick that on my instructions. And then I can just place it right over my background fabric where the pattern indicates. And I can continue doing that piece by piece. I don't myself have to do it in any order. I think I'm going to do some up and down, because sometimes if I work too long with my back bent over, I'll get a sore back. So I'm going to be doing these antennas. These remind me of my favorite Martian when I was a kid. If you have really small kids, they could use this as almost puzzle pieces and just let them put the color applique shapes right on the paper pattern if they can figure out where they go. They don't have to be peeling them off or anything. You could just use it as a puzzle until you get ready to do it on the fabric. If they're a little bit older, they could actually help you peel and place them on the fabric. And if they're older yet, they could maybe even help you with the iron. Peeling the paper off is really easy, but sometimes you might have a little trouble peeling a piece off. And in that case, you could just take a pen or a seam ripper or anything that has a sharp edge and score the paper, and then when you bend over the shape, it gives you something to lift up and get the paper by. As I said before, Noah's Ark was always one of my favorite stories. I think it would be fascinating if they really could find the Ark, or at least parts of it. It's always been my understanding that most religions have a flood story in their history. Giraffes always seem so peaceful to me, but I imagine they're not always peaceful. I've heard at the zoo they can only have one male in the enclosure because the males are very territorial. They can have many females, but only one male. They're also incredibly fast. Did you know that a giraffe can run 35 miles an hour? So don't think you can outrun a giraffe. You'll notice that these eyes have two different sizes of the yellow background and two different sizes of the black ultra suede. And while I mentioned the ultra suede, I will tell you that because it's thicker than the other pieces, it also means that it's a little bit heavier. And that's a real tiny piece of Steam-A-Seam 2 on their back. So you have to watch these so they don't fall off until you get them fused. If anything was going to fall off, it would be those little pieces. So keep an eye on those. I was just out today and I found what I think is going to be some really good border fabric for this. I won't know, of course, till I finish. I'm still anxious to hear how many of you think I should put sashing in between the blocks. Now, the original pattern did not have sashing, but I don't always like to do exactly what the pattern showed because we've already seen that. It's nice to sometimes see a little something else. But you can see, since we're going in real time, just exactly how fast this process can go. It would be fun if you had grandkids or nieces or nephews visiting to actually make this while they were visiting, and then you could, after they left, quilt it and send it to them as a Christmas gift or other holiday, a birthday present. I think this would be great in a nursery. Be great for a Sunday school room. We're just down to a couple things here. And let's see, we have all of these orange dots and half dots, or circles and half circles. I'm going to put these on edge first, since that's the important part. Even after I talk about it in the video, often we get comments asking if we top stitch. We have never top stitched any of our samples. If you fuse Steam-A-Seam properly, it does not require top stitching. If you fuse it with steam during that process, it is permanent. We will quilt over samples that are a quilt, but we don't quilt over everything. We have samples that are like an apron, for instance, and the apron is not quilted, and that doesn't get stitched or top stitched. We have aprons that we would bring to the shows, the conventions, and we would wear them, but those had been washed dozens of times. They'd washed and dried, and they would get a soft edge to the around the applique, but they wouldn't fall off. They never peeled up. And even if you top stitch around all of these pieces, you're going to get a soft edge from the needle perforating all the way around all of that fabric. So just know that this does not require top stitching if you fuse it properly. In the past, when I had an overlapping piece, I've kept all the components separate. So this is a little unusual for me, but I think I'm going to do it this way. Just occurred to me today to do it. Sometimes I like to switch up my routine just to keep life interesting. Now, I don't stitch my little antennas. What I like to do with those is just use a black Pigma pen and just make some marks there to connect the little antenna to the head. And now I'm going to keep this piece in the original bag with the pattern, just so I can keep track of it. And I'll keep that with the blocks until we get all of the pieces assembled. So now I can get the light box out of the way. I will look at it from the front because I'm looking at it upside down to make sure everything looks fine, and then we can get to the fusing process. I've removed my light box and my pattern, and I have the Teflon pressing sheet that is underneath the whole block, and I'm also going to fold it over and sandwich it in there. I don't keep water in my iron because eventually all irons leak. So I just keep a dry iron, and I keep water in a misting bottle. It's just plain water. And I'm just going to go ahead and mist some plain water on top of the applique shapes, and this will be our steam portion of the process. So after I get that damp, I'm going to fold over the Teflon pressing sheet, and now I'm going to start my ironing process. And I'm going to start at the bottom, and I'll talk while we go. The Teflon pressing sheet does a couple things for me. Underneath and on top, what it's doing is kind of trapping in the heat and the steam. So I'm getting a really good bond, and I know that that steam is activating the fusible web. If you think about it like concrete mix absolutely requires water for it to be activated. You can't activate concrete without that moisture. And Steam 2 is the same way. You have to have moisture to activate the fusible web. The next thing you need is heat, and so we use an iron. Steam 2 could also be activated by a blow dryer if you wanted to put it on something like glass or wood or some shape that you couldn't use an iron on. We have used it on glass and wood in the studio and other things like canvas, burlap. So you would use a blow dryer and a tea towel to hold it in place afterwards. How long does it take? I can't answer that because different irons have different heat settings. They have different temperatures. There's different ambient temperatures. So that's just something you're going to have to test for yourself. I can tell you that if you are stitching either with top stitching or quilting and you're getting gumming on your needle, that's excess fusible web. That means you did not fuse long enough. That's the most common problem with fusible web. Another reason that I use the Teflon pressing sheet is I don't want any dirt from the sole plate of the iron to transfer onto my really nice pristine white background or my applique shapes. I also don't want any of the adhesive to seep out and get onto my sole plate, so I don't want it to work in either direction. The other thing I don't want is if I get lazy and I just happen to push the iron side to side instead of lifting it up, I don't want to catch the edge of an applique and smush it, and then have that smush underneath my iron and I can't see it, and then when I lift the iron up, I've fused a big crinkled mess permanently on my quilt. That I don't want. So these are just some of the reasons that I like to use the Teflon pressing sheet. In areas where we have multiple layers, where there's a fabric, fusible web, fabric, fusible web, fabric, fusible web, I really want to make sure that the heat has time to translate through all of those layers, including the Teflon pressing sheet. And what am I going to do to make sure it's absolutely set permanently? After I get this done from the front down, I'm going to flip the block over and I'm going to do it from the back down so that I know that Steam 2 has been fully activated the best that it can be. Now I'm going to remist. Now when I do the back, it's not as critical to use the Teflon pressing sheet on the back because it's the back and no one's going to see it. And it allows the heat to really penetrate. So when I get this block nice and toasty and dry, I'll go ahead and start over again and we can see the finish, but I'll also show you me inking in the little antenna. I'm using a Micron Pigma pen. This is a 01 and I've used this for a long time. And I'm just going to make some lines from the head to the antenna. You could either do it, try and do one straight line, or you could do little sketch marks. Whichever way you feel more comfortable. I'm just going to heat set that. I don't remember if it's really required or not, but I'll do it just to be safe. So that's it. The giraffe are ready to also board the arc. We'll have to ask them politely not to board it at 35 miles an hour. So this one's finished and we can get ready to do the last 4 blocks, which we will be doing in following videos. So thank you for joining us today here in the studio. I always enjoy that, the company, and I also enjoy comments. And one of the comments I would really like to hear from you is sashing, yay or nay, in between the blocks. In between the blocks. So until next time, take care of yourself, take care of each other, and thanks for stopping in.